Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. It's an honor, it's a delight to be zooming into the studio of comics creator Morgan Beem today. Morgan, thank you for
Hey,
joining.
everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure, and I and my three dogs that are surrounding me are glad to have you here. I'll mention a couple of works of yours that I know, and as I've told you by email and also just before were recording, I really enjoy your style. I really enjoy the artistic vision that you bring. So curious to
Well, thank
talk
you so
about
much.
that. Absolutely. So Family Trade being one of those books that comes to mind, as well as Crashing. Swamp Thing Twin Branches, and then you've also worked on a popular character, Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. That Buffy.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Definitely some characters that people know, as well as some really interesting stories that sort of are not the popular character arc, but really interesting work. So those are a couple of my favorites that come to mind, but we'll circle back around to some of your favorite experiences as well. But before we do that, what got you into the world of comics? How did you know that this was the space you wanted to be in and to create in?
Yeah, so I'm one of those kind of like, yeah, I feel like classic artist case where I grew up drawing. I always loved to draw. And then when I was younger, probably, I don't know, like middle school age, I got really into manga and anime. And then from there into American comics. And it was just such like a merger of all the things I loved. I feel like I've always kind of been a storyteller. I was definitely
Mhm.
that kid who got like yelled at in class for talking too much all the time. So I always loved to tell stories, and then loving to draw. Discovering comics just kind of felt like this perfect hybrid. And so ever since I was a kid, I would tell anybody who would listen, like, I want to make comic books. I want to draw comic books, and I would
Mhm.
draw them in my free time and make up little stories and kind of go from there. And so, and then as I grew up, that passion only got stronger, and especially got stronger just as I got more into especially American comics and discovered really what that medium can do for storytelling that you can kind of only achieve in this medium.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's just always been a fan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know from looking at your work, watercolor is definitely a thing that comes through. Do you use colored pencils as well, or primarily watercolor?
Primarily watercolor, and then I use like waterproof ink for the line art, which
Oh,
sometimes
cool, cool.
depending, a lot of times it'll just be straight black line art, but like the Buffy short story that you had mentioned, that one is done actually with colorized line work, so
Oh,
sort
nice,
of the
nice.
equivalent of like color holding in digital, but I do it first traditionally. But yeah, then beyond that, mostly just watercolor.
Nice, nice. Yeah. I could tell with Family Trade that it was a watercolor, but I wasn't sure with Crashing that I was on some panels I thought watercolor and then on others I thought, was there something else happening here?
Well,
But
so Crashing, I actually didn't color. That one was colored by the fabulous Triona Farrell. Trina
there
Farrell,
it
sorry,
is.
Tree.
Okay.
So that one was digitally colored. And Tree, I don't know if you're familiar with the rest of her work, but she's just a phenomenal colorist.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so she, I think, really, looked at my work and the other things that I had colored in the past and thought about the textures and how to best suit the line art. So I think she picked up some of that in the digital colors. But yeah, I cannot take credit for the amazing colors of Crashing.
Oh, I
Or
see.
Swamp
I
Thing,
see.
actually. Swamp Thing was also colored by actually my studio mate Jeremy Lawson.
Nice, nice. There's definitely so you were doing the line work there and
Hmm.
bringing the images to life that way.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So sounds like I know collaboration is definitely a thing that happens in the comics medium. So collaborating with folks that are in your studio as well as others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's a lot of fun. I will say that, yeah, when I was working on Swamp Thing with Jeremy coloring, it was so great to be in the same studio. Because he was able just to be like, hey, what is this? Or like, can you take a quick look? And like feedback was such more readily, and I feel like it was nice to have that kind of like close collaboration where generally, everybody lives across the states or across the world, and so you're relying just on email back and forth, and so you can't have these kind of immediate answers or these kind of nuanced takes. And also a lot of times it's filtered, through an editor. Sometimes in the collaboration, you're not necessarily directly talking to the colorist or directly talking to the writer. Sometimes notes are passed, via editorial in kind of a more stricter professional setting, which is also fine. But it was really fun to work with Jeremy and have that again, kind of like in person one to one.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious about what informs your approach when you have a project. What are some of the things that you try to keep in mind that sort of shape the what you bring to the page?
So usually when I first get a product, the big thing that I'm always trying to build is the mood in a comic because I think that's so important uh, to visual storytelling, to set the pace. If you want to have any kind of like emotional payoff, whether that's like horror and you want people to feel kind of creeped out, or whether that's devastation at the loss of a character or the building of a romance, right? Most of that is done by building up that mood, which is done in both the visual imagery you use and I feel like then also the pacing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I really tried to think about, you know, what my like shot calls are going to be, for like if I'm going to work on a horror story, I want things to feel, I want my characters to feel kind of closed in, or that those classic shots that are kind of like through the window or maybe through the rafters that makes that feeling of like being stalked kind of.
Hmm.
Because a lot of
Hmm.
those things I feel like sometimes in storytelling are subtle. You're not necessarily being like, oh, this is a shot call because somebody's watching me, but you still kind of get that like eerie feeling. And so I
Yeah.
feel like I try to think about that in the sense of shot calls and visual pacing. But then also just in the imagery I'm using. Comics is really cool because you can, unlike a movie, right, where a movie you can only see what the camera sees, what's only on the screen. In comics it's kind of cool because I can have a panel that is essentially like the screen, the movie, but then I can also have background panels or certain things that are maybe going to be either just straight washes of watercolor or kind of iconic imagery to help evoke different moods. I did that a lot in Swamp Thing Twin Branches with playing with like plants and different plant meanings,
Hmm. Hmm.
because flowers and plants have so many meanings throughout history that sometimes when things were getting tense, I would try to pick plants and kind of stick them in the margins of the background to kind of try and inform that mood going forward, which is one of the things that I think is really unique to comics again, is that you have that visual room play and kind of enhance the storytelling.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a clever design move. And as you were talking about creating mood, I was thinking about Swamp Thing and just how that book, that character kind of lends itself to some really interesting moods and changes in moods as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's kind of a sad story a little bit,
it
but
is.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, but the whole book I feel like is deeply, it is about feelings your place, feeling you know um anxious or lost, or misguided, which I feel like is especially common. I liked that they picked that age range for Alec and his twin brother in the book, that kind of like last year of high school, right? Because everything in your life is changing. Either you're going away to college or you're not, but people are leaving. Like it's not ever going to quite be the same as it was, and that really breeds that kind of insecurity in where your place is in the world.
Yeah.
And I will say that like a lot of that is in big part due to Maggie Stater, who wrote it. She just I don't know if you've read any of her other books. She's a pretty
Hmm.
prolific YA
Hmm.
author, but she just really gets that mood across very well. I feel like in most her writing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and really does a good like introspective deep dive into like characters and what they're feeling and where they are. So it was really exciting to work with her. Her script was really fun.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Any other dream collaborations or dream worlds that you would want to create in?
Oh, I mean, so many. There's like established characters are always fun because it's just kind of fun to play in somebody else's sandbox. Again, I loved that I got to do my own take on like a historic slayer for Buffy, but I
Hmm.
would love to work on like a creepy dead man book one day. I think would
Oh
be super
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, that would be.
um, there's a ton of writers I'd obviously love to collaborate with. I mean, there's just so much talent in this industry right now, and I've been really fortunate to work with the writers I already have. But like Ram V comes to mind. I think he's one of
Hmm.
like the strongest voices in comics right now. I will read anything he writes. Philip Kennedy Johnson, I'm also like a huge fan of, and hopefully one day. We talked a long time ago about doing a project together just for fun.
Hmm.
But then, he kind of blew up and a bunch of work came in as should because he's a very good writer. But I hope we can circle back to that one day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love what Rom V is doing. Again, with Swamp Thing, Swamp Thing's a recurring
Mm-hmm.
element here, but also in Detective Comics, there's quite a unique vision there. So to see your art with Rom's storytelling would be a wonderful pair up. That would be
I
great.
would be thrilled. And I love a lot of the creator-owned books that he's been doing. Obviously, like The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, I just thought was
Hmm.
so inspired. Obviously Felipe Andrade on that kills it in general also. And the same thing with Rare Flavors, their new book coming out. I just think he does a really good job of like presenting and I feel like he does it in his mainstream stuff too, right? He gives you like this larger world and then you just kind of spiral in tighter and tighter and tighter. And that's just like
Hmm.
such a like a very good storytelling method.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and then to get to take a script like that, like you were talking about Maggie's script, and bring your vision to it and collaborate and bring it to visual life. That's one of the just the great things about comics that I love as well.
Yeah, it's a real joy. I really enjoy my job. I always joke that like I always think the artist on comics, right? My job is kind of like if something really cool happened to you, right?
Hmm.
Like yesterday you were going to a coffee shop or something and this like cool story happened and you tell me that story. And then 2 weeks later I go to a party and I tell that story to everybody there. I feel like
Hmm.
a lot of times that's my job as the visual storyteller. It's like it's not my story, I didn't write it, but I am the one who's responsible for telling it. And I feel like sometimes that gets a little lost and people think it's like, "Oh, it's just the art." And it's like, well, you can dislike my art style, but if you still enjoyed the story and it was clearly told and you got the mood, like I'm still doing a good job.
Hmm. 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 True.
um, but yeah, it's a real treat to be able to tell stories this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great metaphor for thinking about what it's like as well. Um, anything that is currently on the creative lens, the creative focus that you can mention or can talk about, as well as spaces where people can go to learn more. I think there's a website. Is that right?
Yeah. So do you mean like things I'm working on by
Hmm.
that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I finished up. It unfortunately will take a little while to come out because it's on the book side, but I worked with Sarah Miller on a YA graphic novel called You Belong Here that should be coming out from First Second in, I believe, spring of 2025.
Love
I
it.
don't know if
Love
that's a
it.
hard date yet or not, but that one's really fun. It's just kind of I guess, like a coming of age story, again, dealing with that kind of last year of high school and a lot of the turbulence and change and emotions that come with that.
Hmm.
Um, so that one was really fun. I enjoyed that, and that'll be coming out soon. The other things I'm working on, I cannot speak about yet since I have not
Very
been announced.
exciting.
But
Always exciting.
I am uh, definitely still busy, gainfully employed, which is wonderful. And then yeah, you can find definitely examples of my work. I have a website that's just my full name, so morganbeamart.com. But I'm also I'm on social media. I'm mostly just on Instagram these days. I have all the other ones, but I'm probably not checking them very often. So, but yeah, if anybody ever wants to see more of my work or has questions or just wants to like shoot the shit, you can DM me. I'm just at Morgan Beam on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else. But again, mostly on Instagram these days.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for the time. Thank you for the conversation, and excited to see what's coming from First Second as well because they're one of my favorite publishers, and I love the YA middle grades sort of graphic novel space. Very smart of DC to
Mhm.
explore that with books like Twin Branches. So, excited to see the work that's on the way.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Jason. This is great.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, and glad to have you back anytime.